not the
Everyone good? Yep. Lords and ladies, non-binary nobles, we are gathered here in the Great Hall for the most trying of times in our rule. The hunting hordes are coming, and their riders number like the blades of grass on the plains from whence they came. This is the most dangerous time in our realm. They have horse archers, which we fear may cut down even the bravest of our knights from a distance. They have unbelievable numbers and an unbelievable level of tactical know-how and knowledge. We know from the scouts, we know from the soothsayers what they are capable of. It is crucial that we survive this war and we continue. And what's most important in this debate to get right is to arrest the correct traitor. Arrest the correct person. Because in either case, they will betray us, they will betray the court, they will identify true positions, and they will allow hunting hordes entry into our kingdom. One of them is the traitor, and we have to get it right, which means that any question of second or third order effects that might hurt or help the realm are of dramatically less importance than establishing very clearly and firmly here and now precisely who is the traitor and making the best judgment upon them. Not right now, concubine. Our aims are so obvious they scarce bear mentioning, but of course we must preserve our honor. We must preserve our honor, the safety of the realm, and our own personal status as lords. Survival is conditional and tied to those goals, which is to say, we would rather die in assassination, perhaps by Bowen's fiends, for the interests of the realm, where the Bowen were locked up in a cage, incapable of betraying the king's troops, So, crucially for us, honor is of primary importance, the defense and safety of the realm, and then from that, our personal status in any kind of war or post-war scenario. Firstly, let's explain why it's probably Bowen and why it probably isn't Wormtongue. I have a septet of reasons as to why it's probably Bowen. The first is that Bowen is obviously a spy master, far more familiar with troop movements, with all kinds of incredibly valuable and juicy information that might be particularly tempting to the jowls of a great Hun. Thirdly, we point out that Bowen is already provably amoral. He very likely killed many nobles, not just commoners, nobles, in his pursuit of power, rather recklessly. We would point out as well, of course, he is a eunuch, which is actually quite important because he has no children and has no direct interest in transferring inheritance or maintaining a family line in this country, which means for him, this life is just about extracting as much good experiences in the short term before he dies. He has no interest in eternal honor, the fiend. The fourth thing we point out is he's an atheist, which of course reinforces that sense of short-termism, the fact that if the hunting hordes were to come, the best case is to flee for the hills and live a better life in the Deutschland. Also, of course, explains why he's not particularly culturally or committed to our people, our language, our customs, because he's an atheist. He rejects the religion, which is the sort of wellspring of all of those beliefs and all of those customs. No, thank you. Of course, he's a foreigner, which is crucially important. He may have all kinds of ability to speak all kinds of other languages. He's of foreign blood. He perhaps has always wanted to go home. And finally, he is a minor noble who has diminished holdings or very few lands we didn't bother to check. And that suggests he is resentful of us, as we were appointed to this land by the king himself. We don't inherit it. We were appointed as a result of our good service, and that he who has a good relationship with the king was not. That resentment, the kind of resentment that festers in the heart of the craving and upwardly, the ones who desire, minor nobles who desire things, it is very, very likely to be him. Why is it unlikely to be Wormtongue? Well, first, of course, Wormtongue is our bosom brother who saved our life in battle, no less. To arrest him would be a betrayal of that relationship, and of course, it's incredibly unlikely that he would have betrayed us, because we elevated him. We gave him everything that he is. We made him. We made him the man he is. We gave him the adoration of the people. We gave him his position, his prestige. All comes from us and comes from our relationship. The idea that he would betray us, were it perfectly rational, is laughable. But of course, we'd also point to the fact that the evidence as it is arranged against him is that he likes food, drink, dice, and women. Like any red-blooded man, he's merely a jovial fella. He's not a jolly man you would want to hang out with. It is very unlikely that that is enough to substantiate a traitorous look, unlike, for of course, the nasty Bowen who has murdered his many enemies. But it also points to the fact that the murky rumours about Wormtongue are very likely just resentment from other people because he's a commoner who has risen, as some say, above his station. Obviously, of course, not us. Finally, we would point to the fact that as a commoner, he's very likely to be a family man. Again, we didn't bother to check. And he loves living life. Why take this risk? Why run away from the realm of which he is a beloved son? It seems incredibly unlikely. It must be Bowen. But were it not Bowen, Bowen still has an assassination network and could kill us. So we must arrest him now as impetus to this. Because if at any point Bowen were to feel insecure, he could, if he felt that we were at risk of attacking him or arresting him, it may be the case he could direct attacks upon our person. And this is incredibly problematic because if we arrest Wormtongue, for example, and let's imagine even if we were correct, Bowen is likely to feel incredibly insecure. And because we have arrested Wormtongue, Bowen may feel that we may be arresting others, we're being erratic, we're meant to be trusted, and it is entirely possible that they will attempt to take an attempt at our life anyway to remove us in that sense. And as a result, it seems actually if we were so weak to care, if we were so weak to care only about our own person, it would be actually rational to arrest Bowen, regardless of whether or not it was him. Of course, we are willing to accept any assassination risk because our life is already under threat as a result of the great Hark cause, and it's our honor, the honor of not having correctly identifying a traitor to the king in our own court. I mean, the shame. We must arrest the correct man. It could only be Bowen. Let's briefly discuss how Wormtongue is somewhat valuable to the overall war effort. He's in charge of managing the economy, which means he's able to manage supply lines. He's in charge of paying soldiers, incredibly important. He knows where farmers are. He knows to keep them happy. He's beloved by the people for reasons we don't really understand, but because he's one of them, they love him, and they will be willing to accept, perhaps, for example, reduced rations in a siege scenario, which we feel is potentially kind of likely given this stuff. He's also very liked by the minor nobility, who of course will be providing all the sons that we'll be throwing into the Hun's swords. We'll point out in a preemptive response to some potential opposition nonsense that, perhaps the Merchants Guild, will be upset. We'll point out, one, the trade is very unlikely to be happening given the Hun Accords. Two, merchants are easily bullied. This is an agrarian society, not a post-modern commercial one. Finally, healing maesters will not want to be associated with the traitor once we've correctly identified him as such. And for all of those reasons, we must arrest and kill the traitor Bowen.
Great, thank you so much for that speech. Now I'd like to welcome our leader to the
The counsel of Wormtongue is wretched. We must silence his tongue before he whispers any more poison into our ear. Bowen has forever been a stone for our house, for our lords. We must, in fact, preserve him. First of all, why Wormtongue is more likely to be the foul and treacherous informant. Second of all, an explanation as to why the arrest of Bowen would spell our downfall. Firstly, an explanation of why Wormtongue would in fact be more able to do the kind of treachery that we are hoping to prevent. The first thing to explain is that the sickly eye of Wormtongue is far more likely to know the location of the troops. And because note, the nature of the treachery is not one of usual betrayal, but revealing important and sensitive locations of troops to the attackers. Why is it that Wormtongue is the only one that knows this? First of all, Wormtongue is an ex-warrior, an ex-master of the blade, and thus likely has connections with the army that persists to this day. Second of all, is the master of coin, and thus can very easily and inconspicuously bribe the top generals who know the locations of troops, whereas no one else does. Third of all, it means that given the and as a result of this, it means that in order to betray the position of the troops, only someone who has this level of knowledge and this level of connection and this level of ability to bribe is the person who can do it. Even if this opening government team can explain to you Bowen is the most treacherous snake on earth, and the ability to explain that he knows the locations of the troops, obviously it can't be Bowen. Why is it then that Bowen comparatively is far less likely to have this knowledge? First of all, because he's an atheist, he's far less likely to have connections with the army. The reason for this is simple. Soldiers are people of God because they risk their life on the battlefield every day. And they can only do this if they believe they'll be ascended into heaven as a result of their sacrifice. Clearly, any atheist would be shunned. Second of all, he is an older noble and thus is less likely to be fresh from the battlefield. He does not know where the troops are. He does not know who holds the power. He clearly lacks the knowledge. Third of all, he is a healer and merchant both disciplines, which are actively disincentivized from warfare. They hate having to heal the wounds because they know the horrors of war, and they hate having to engage in warfare because it stops all trade. This means Bowen is far less likely to have connections with the army. As a result of all of this, the betrayal of the position of the troops can only be done by someone who is insider knowledge, and Bowen is unable to do this. The only response we might possibly get from this scandalous government bench is that Bowen has informants, and that means he can say. But first of all, only high-ranking militants can actually get this information. Because notice, we aren't talking about the usual movements of troops that anyone could see in any field, because there is no reason you would have to pay a king's ransom for those kinds of secrets. You could just send a dude out there to have a gander. Like, clearly this is sensitive information. And the reason that, and obviously this means informants aren't likely top-ranking officials because they don't, they're not informants, those are regular dudes. But second of all, we explain that because these informants are in the king's round and not on the field, they don't have access to this sensitive information. The locations of troops and the strategic maneuvering is not done in the halls of kings and the halls of lords, but on the tents and the fields of battle. Second of all, even if you don't believe fully the persuasiveness of that capacity analysis, there is clearly indications of incentive analysis for why Wormtongue's greedy heart is far more likely to be compelled by this level of treachery. First of all, Wormtongue is a man of dice, a man of risk, a man who puts everything on the line. If he extracts such a thrill from rolling dice and deciding whether or not he can eat the next day, clearly he would extract a similar thrill from betraying the one he loved and cared about to some extent. Second of all, we explained that he's provably far more ambitious than Bowen himself, because Wormtongue is, in fact, from mysterious or low birth. He spent his entire life climbing the political ranks, higher and higher, leaving behind his family such that there is no mention of them. Obviously, this is a man who puts ambition before everything else. The comparative here is Bowen. Bowen, a man who is a rock. Bowen, a man who stayed with a low noble when he is popular in the king's round. Obviously, he does not feel the same fire of ambition. Second of all, Wormtongue is a man of debts, and this means he has far more incentive to get a huge amount of money to pay this off. Because, quite clearly, aforementioned gambling, he puts everything on the line, he must oft lose. Third of all, Wormtongue is likely filled with avarice and sadness because he's denied a close relationship with the king, whereas Bowen is not. The result, and finally, and perhaps the most compelling reason, if Bowen, for any reason, felt the need to flee the service of good-ordered Jorkin, he could probably just skedaddle to the king's round anyways, like he's got a bunch of friends there. Unclear way I'm going to go through this lengthy process. And before I move on to the political and devastating ramifications of the arrest of Bowen, even if he is the traitor, I'll take closing.
The Huns are not a god-fearing kind. This is why Bowen is the traitor.
My lord.
Oh, I don't think so, though. Second explanation. Political ramifications of the arrest. The frameth of this claimant is that if Bowen is guilty, arresting him would be so diabolical that the results would be even worse than allowing an invasion to occur. Why is this the case? First, you invoke the ire of the senior nobles to directly serve the king. And this is important because Wormtongue is the representation of the lower and smaller nobles, whereas Bowen is the representation of the powerful and strong nobles. The powerful and strong always fear rebellion from the weak. They always fear them banding together and rising up. So the second you arrest Bowen, everyone believes that you are leading a rebellion against the king. The reaction thus would be swift. The reason for this is twofold. First of all, the old lords and kings round are likely envious of the young. Their youthful stride, their ability to ride on fields, their ability to fence and practice, etc., etc. And second of all, they're likely fearful of all, as I said before, the lower lords banding together to extract more land, to extract more power, to shirk their taxes and shirk their responsibility. Second of all, it is unlikely that this ire could at all be dispelled, even if Bowen was the traitor. Because first, obviously, Bowen would not admit to being the potential traitor. Under no way would he say, I, in fact, was going to betray you, my lord. It would simply deny it. There was no way you can prove it. Second of all, even if you could torture a betrayal out of the great and noble Lord, torture a confession out of the great and noble Lord Bowen, every one of the major lords is simply not likely to believe them, simply saying that, well, this was extracted under torture and thus must be fabricated. The third thing to explain here is the ire of the greater nobles would be swift and would be wrathful. This is because first, they must crush betrayal swiftly to stop discontent spreading. They view Wormtongue, this up-and-coming lord who is in fact has no respect for tradition or the way of things, whispering into the ear of you, a young lord. They believe that in order to stop these whispers spreading, they must crush you and your dynasty. Second of all, the king has strong horses and good men, and thus will ride quickly and kill you and your family, which is very cringe. But fourth of all, Bowen has a series of sleeper agents and sleeper assassins, because this over the government team seems to believe the only way Bowen would invoke his assassins is if he felt, I don't know, scared or angry in some way. Obviously, he would have orders to his assassins to kill the king, to release him if he was arrested. Obviously, those assassins and informants would do everything in their power to keep them safe. So this means even if you arrest him, you will die instantly. You'll be slain in your sleep, a treacherous end to Lord Jorkin.
Alright, thank you so much for that speech, and I'd like to welcome our deputy prime minister.
Nobles both minor and major, I urge you to consider seriously the evidence that we put before you today. That clearly the foreigner, the eunuch, the atheist in our strongly religious community is the one that you ought regard with suspicion, is the one who is overwhelmingly likely to be traitorous, is the one that should be ought hand over to the king for interrogation forthwith. Let's talk firstly about why it is the case that if Wormtongue is in fact our traitor, we will not be able to survive either way, and so we ought in this case adjudicate the debate on the presumption that we ought think that he is not. Firstly, let's talk about why it is that arresting Wormtongue guarantees that you will lose this war, whether he is the traitor or whether he is not. The first thing is that Wormtongue is the manager of our great economy. He is aware of exactly where the stores of our noble grain are, where it is that we are able to preserve our food. He manages the rations and the economic planning in our largely agrarian community, which means that it is likely that in the event that he were to be detained, he could easily destroy those food stores, which would cripple our ability to withstand the siege that we are likely to be subjected to by the Hunnic hordes on both sides of the house, noting that in the information slide provided to us, they are already on their way, and in fact are only hours away. So regardless of whether they know the location of our troops or not, they will be upon our walls shortly, which means that we will have to prepare for a siege, and we'll have to make sure that we have rations available to us. And I would note that even if Wormtongue is loyal, he might react to his imprisonment quite negatively, and might instruct certain people who are loyal to him to destroy the food stores that he likely controls. The second thing is that Wormtongue controls pay for the soldiers and is popular amongst the minor nobles. We explain are the ones who give us those soldiers from their estates, and indeed who often provide their own sons in the forms of knights. Which means that if you lose their support, you spark disarray amongst them, and in particular, you remove the person who has historically been responsible for providing coin to the soldiers of the realm. That is a world in which your soldiers are far less able to withstand against that army. And even if it is the case that Wormtongue is in fact the traitor, losing the ability to maintain the loyalty of the minor nobles, the trust of the soldiers, and to supply the coin means that you are, in fact, even weaker if you arrest him. The second thing that I would say here is that a traitorous vizier would not likely have managed crown resources so well as to have engendered loyalty from amongst the minor nobles who are predominantly responsible for the supply of soldiers. His actions in the past have strengthened our army and given us the resources that we might use to stand against the Huns, and were he to have traitorous intent, he would not have likely managed them so highly effectively. What I would just say at the end of this is that whether Wormtongue is the traitor or not, you can be certain that his arrest would spark disarray, inefficiency, desertion, mutiny from the minor lords and their soldiers, which guarantees that we will be demised, regardless of whether the Huns know the positions of those soldiers or not. If there are no soldiers in position in the first instance, that information is irrelevant. So betraying Wormtongue up to the king guarantees that we will lose this fight. And obviously, if Berwin in fact turns out to be the traitor, it also reveals information that's additionally bad. But you are certain that at the point where you lose the loyalty of the soldiers, you will lose the war against the Huns. Closing.
Is not the Vizier Wormtongue a dreaded foreigner? How does that not know that he is not one of Merkel's?
You have misread the information slide. It is in fact Berwin who is a dreaded foreigner, and additionally a eunuch, and additionally an atheist. And I would note that atheism and eunuchs are things that are more common in the far-off Orient, and so we ought probably presume that Berwin may in fact have ties to the Hunnic hordes, who also originate from that dreaded part of the planet. So I think that that means additionally that there are reasons to believe that Berwin is far more likely both to have the wherewithal to communicate with the Hunnic hordes, who communicate in a pagan tongue which you and I would not understand, but Berwin in fact may speak owing to his foreign allegiance, his status as a eunuch, and his practice of dreaded atheism, which means that he is more likely to both have the scope to communicate in the first place, suggestive of his guilt, but additionally, it is Berwin who is also the one who has an information network that ensures that you would be informed of military affairs. It is Berwin who has an information network that allows him to communicate with the Hunnic hordes in the first instance, where it is unclear how Wormtongue would have gone about such a thing, owing that he has common origins from our noble land, practices our religion, and speaks our enlightened tongue, which means that it is far more likely that Berwin had the wherewithal to do this in the first place. And additionally, we explained to you that his status as a eunuch means that he is unlikely to care about the longevity of our realm relative to, for instance, the fortunes of the cats which he houses within his tower, which again is a reason that you ought to look upon him rather with distrust. I'm going to talk now about politics and how this is likely to be responded to, but before I go on, I'll take opening as well.
You have blundered in most disastrous fashion. Betrayal is within hours, not the horde.
Yes, betrayal is within hours, and it is likely that the horde is going to occur shortly afterwards, because in order to betray information to the horde must be rather present, such that you would be able to communicate them, owing to the fact that in our noble time period, we do not have resources such as the telephone. So, I would assume that with betrayal comes the Hunnic horde. That is the only thing that makes much sense. The best case for you is that they are a rapid horse ride again away, which suggests that they will be within our walls within the next 24 hours. Let's talk then about politics and how this is likely to be reacted to. The nobles as a whole are strongly religious, and they distrust Berwin's atheism. They are likely to believe with us when we say that the soothsayer has given us indications and such signs and augurs and portents as to indicate that Berwin is likely to be the betrayer. They are likely to also trust Wormtongue, who has managed the coin effectively, the thing that most nobles care most deeply about, of course only second to God and their religion. And the third thing is that they are likely to be very trusting of the testimony upon the soothsayer, who has never let us down in the past. What is important to note is that we do not have much time to act, but maintaining the loyalty of the lords in the immediate term is most critical to ensuring that their soldiers will indeed be in position and ready to combat the Hunnic hordes, but also to ensure that guardsmen will be keeping the walls tight, and that we will have reports when the Hunnic hordes arrive. So all of this means then that preserving that is the most important thing in the realm. The last thing I want to talk about is to discuss the worst case of whether demise is indeed inevitable and what we ought to do in that instance. And I think there are a few distinct benefits that flow from our particular side of the house. First thing I would say here is that you do owe a life debt to Wormtongue, owing to his quick thinking in battle in the past, and that is something that ought to be respected above most other things. If you are unsure, if you are questioning, if you are not entirely convinced by our arguments, you ought to defer to the fact that there is the weight of the life debt that hangs upon you. You ought to preserve your honor and fulfill that. You ought side with Wormtongue as a result. You ought to preserve the religion of your kingdom, which Wormtongue follows and Berwin scorns. And I would note that when the Hunnic hordes arrive, it is likely that people from within our kingdom will survive and will maintain the day-to-day management of it. Maintaining somebody who is religious and will retain those religious rights is more useful and will preserve our honor and our legacy. It is likely that that somebody like Wormtongue, who has children and who is invested in the long-term care of our realm, will care about our heirs and protect them, will preserve our legacy in other forms. Even if he may be a traitor, he is still likely to do that out of respect for our common faith, our common heritage, and our common time in the past together. For those reasons, you ought to defer, if you are uncertain, preserving your honor and preserving the loyalty of Wormtongue, your honorable vizier who saved your life in battle. But I think that this is also the most plausible way of beating the Hunnic hordes. For those reasons, very proud to govern.
Great, thank you so much for that speech, and then I'd like to welcome the deputy leader of the audience.
The man who has reached beyond his God-ordained station in this life has whet an appetite which there is no sating. Such the traitor will never stop until he himself is Lord Paramount, until he himself is trusted within the bosom of a truly royal court. Vizier Berwin, on the other hand, has no such endeavour, has already been trusted, has lasted before our reign, and will last probably after it as well. That is a man that you can trust because he wants nothing from you and owes nothing to you. Wormtongue, on the other hand, owes everything to you and will never stop until he takes everything from you. Firstly, noble lords and ladies, I shall explain why Wormtongue is the more likely culprit of the two. I shall secondly explain why you ought not make an enemy of Berwin, irrespective of whether he has betrayed you in this one instance. Let us firstly start with the matter of the culprit. The first observation I would make is that the information Berwin would have is more widely available, so fewer persons would pay for it. The only plausible way would be through, as we observe at the leader of the opposition, through spies who are not themselves soldiers, as opposed to the incredible source of information which Wormtongue has. And I think what is important to note is that the strategic information, beyond my womanly mind to be sure, is in fact beyond most of the minds of people not currently in the military. It is doubtful, incredibly doubtful, that our fair Lord Berwin has the capacity to communicate the meaningfulness of that strategic information to another, especially one of military standing as the Hunnic hordes. The second observation, and particularly damning for this fair government bench, is that Wormtongue is a person who acts knowing and under the assurance of your trust. He knows that you favour him more and would defend him, as you have defended him time and time again from people who would doubt his loyalty, from people who would show him skepticism. Berwin knows he does not have your loyalty. He has no particular affection from you, and therefore the only thing he has is his actions and his loyalty. The third observation we make is that Wormtongue has a far greater incentive. We observe that he has substantial gambling debts, and given that he is still unfortunately in possession of his stones, he is incredibly open to being charmed by the evil wiles of women. Speaking myself as a concubine, I know this to be true, that Lord Wormtongue frequents on many occasions brothels and gambling dens which accrue debt abounding. My services are indeed very expensive. The second observation to say here is that Wormtongue has the type of suspicion that is most lethal in our fair times, which is top-down suspicion, from which all of the kind of suspicion that draws from courts from which all authority is ordained, rather than the reverse, which is what Berwin has, and what in fact Berwin has sustained himself against for many years. Berwin fears not the Lords Minor of this region, but Wormtongue fears enormously the power of a king, which makes far more sense for someone who, as we know from our faithful soothsayer, has sought respite in another kingdom beyond the power of said king. And thirdly, this Wormtongue has no other source of wealth or title, and thus would resort to a single exorbitant instance of bribery, which is easy to conceal and easy to flee with. Fourthly, the fourth reason that he is likely the culprit is, frankly, it fits his modus operandi. He's fundamentally an opportunist. How are we to know that on that fateful day of battle, Wormtongue did not strategically position himself to save our fair lord's life, such that he would engender his trust for many years to come? That is certainly the type of thing that a thieving opportunist would do. He has no other escape. We Bowen does. Bowen draws his legitimacy from the highest court. He has way easier ways to deal with us, or indeed to deal with anybody else. Secondly then, on why you ought not make an enemy of Bowen if you would like your reign to be long and fruitful, I shall take the opening government.
The piece of evidence most relied upon by the stars of the opposition bench in accusing Goodman Wormtongue is that he enjoys playing at dice. If confessing to that particular weakness is proof of disloyalty,
This
then
is
he
a
is
most
loyal
foul.
soldier in his
This
army.
is a most foul and traitorous mischaracterization from the opening government team. It is not that he enjoys throwing dice. In fact, he loses at them, as many people often do, and has accrued substantial debts, which is an incredible set of incentives to engage in bribery most foul. Let's secondly explain why you ought not make an enemy of Bowen, even if he is the traitor. Let's explain the series of events that occur once you order the arrest of Lord Bowen. The first is that the king will undoubtedly intervene for his release. That is a person that he himself has trusted on many occasions, and frankly, someone who he trusts more so than you. He has outlasted you. He will continue to outlast you after you are gone. Because secondly, you will be replaced. Not only is this someone who has more trustworthiness and more favor from the court than you do to handle the types of day-to-day problems that occur in the process of governance, you are also the person who missed the true traitor in your midst, the far more treacherous and far more believably treacherous Wormtongue, and allowed your realm to be invaded by Hunnic hordes. The third thing is that you'll be assassinated, kill off you. These would-be traitors would claim that Wormtongue's arrest would spell disaster, but this is not true. The first reason is that this traitor's plan is to flee. So either way, those stores of grain will be left unguarded or will be left unattended by the Lord. Like the plan, when this invasion occurs, is to run away. So I think you have to assume that we are doomed either way, if that indeed is the case. Second, all of the common people who live in the keep and in the realm also rely on the food stores of grain remaining undestroyed. So you see, if you try to bribe a man to ensure his own death, you might find that you're unsuccessful. The Lord of Government makes further foul misrepresentations about what lies beyond the horizon matters not. Our Lord must almost certainly, irrespective, flee to safer premises if the hordes indeed arrive. There is no guarantee of his safety now or ever. Second is that many stone castles have indeed outlasted the savagery of hordes in this way, and you ought consider the future. You ought consider your children's future. Thirdly, the success of holding off the hordes is not beyond entirely your control. Your king holds you responsible for Bowen's treatment and can be more or less favorable to you depending on the way that he is treated at this time. Second is your superiors that hold the key to your reinforcements will not come to the aid of the killer of their friend and trusted advisor, Lord Bowen. The ability to fend off the Hunnic hordes relies on you keeping someone who has meaningful connections beyond the kingdom. Their final attempt is to explain that the minor lords are more important in the proximate term, but the minor lords are also terrified of being deemed traitors by their Lord Paramount, which is you, which means that if someone is branded a traitor by your will, with the support of the divine king himself, they too will fall in line and deem that person a traitor also, lest they be deemed a traitor in the second instance. That is why we must arrest this foul traitor. That is how we survive the hordes. I'm incredibly proud to oppose.
Great, thank you so much for that speech, and now I'd like to welcome the governor member.
Opening government says we ought to arrest the correct traitor. But I think a more important thing to do is to arrest the man who would have the most damage done against you if he were out and free. Also, to arrest the man and put him in a place where he's protected if he is useful to you. Those are other considerations to keep in the debate. Nay, It is not about who is the correct traitor. Both opening teams wash each other out of the debate on this clash. That means this will probably be a closing. Two parts of this extension. First, how will this arrest occur? Opening opposition is correct. Berwin would hate to be arrested, and the amount of backlash he can exact against you is considerable. Which begs the question, why on earth would Lord Jorkin arrest someone who could probably preempt he's about to be arrested, who has spy networks probably in the soldiers to also know he's about to be arrested? It is deeply unclear to me why he would go out and do something that would engender hatred from the person who has assassins on his side. So, how would this arrest be done? You'll approach him first, before your advisors, before your soldiers, because you know he'll find out anyway. You'll approach him first and float the idea that it is a good idea for him to be imprisoned. It is a good idea for him to be imprisoned because it will protect him. It will make sure that the realms, the actors who think that Berwin is the traitor, especially the common people, which I'll explain later in this speech why people would assume it is Berwin first and foremost. This is the best way to protect him. Berwin would likely accept this arrest for 4 reasons. First, because his conditions will probably be good. I'm not Swedish, because I'm apparently a Lord person, but Sweden has great prisons. It'll be like that. It's like a hotel, which probably means that he'll be fine going into a protective, it's like witness protection. 2, we think that this is just logical. It suppresses the backlash to see him killed. Most of the general public see Wormtail as being very, very popular, but they dislike Berwin. He's part of the upper elite. He's part of the higher class. And this is an agrarian society, right? Which means that there are more commoners than there are people who are living lavishly, which therefore means there's a lot of threat to his life. Necessarily, he wants to be safe from the backlash that they exact against him. And they will be satiated when they see him arrested, because you can spin it, even though you are telling Berwin that you don't think he's a traitor, you can spin it as we've arrested the traitor. And Berwin is fine to do that, because as we investigate and use our justice people to find the evidence, we know, oh, maybe he's not the actual traitor, and we can release him after that. So he's probably fine with that. Thirdly, this is just a nice break from work. He's probably just going to be sitting indoors. He's going to be sitting and having a great time, sipping some wine, eating some free food. But fourthly, he still gets access to his spy network if he really wants to, so he can still work if he wants to. Think of it like working from home. He'll be able to, with the spy networks that exist in the guards, be able to still know what's going on. So it's deeply unclear to me why a prison would be something that Berwin dislikes. It is unclear that he actually gets angry. Why? This is debate winning for 2 reasons. Firstly, it neutralizes opening opposition's accusation that this would anger Berwin. They did not examine how the arrest would actually occur. They didn't even model it. This team is at the debate. Secondly, it washes out opening government, because they don't answer the question that opening opposition provides, which is the question of, well, why would Berwin go so quietly? Why wouldn't Berwin backlash and kill you beforehand? They don't answer that answer. They don't answer that question. Next part of this speech is why this arrest will protect Berwin. But before that, closing.
My lord, you find yourself on ashen turf. It is okay to be honest. You claim the territory that opening teams have already contested. Sheath your knife away from your opening government's back.
This is literally not a knife. They assert.
We say very clearly that we would have the traitor over forthwith, given the speed of the threat occurring. And we would just...
Speak English, what are you saying?
We said that we would give it to the king quickly. Like...
I don't get it. I literally don't know what that is. Alright, why this arrest will protect Berwin. Now, the first thing to do is explain why Berwin is far more important than Wormtail, and why you need Berwin alive for the future protection of your kingdom. Firstly, he has far more information compared to Wormtail. Yes, Wormtail is a financier, but you can find a finance bro any fucking where. Secondly, this person is just uniquely positioned in a spy network which can connect you to other kingdoms. He can help you lift yourself up in the rungs of lords, so that you can maybe become not a minor lord, but a slightly more major lord. But also, Berwin is just a little bit more cunning, which means that if you have any other enemies, you can neutralize them through Berwin. Berwin necessarily instills your governance and your power much better than Wormtail does. Wormtail provides one benefit though, which is that he's quite popular. Like, I guess that's true, but with Biden, Kamala Harris was kind of popular. It still hurt him. It's not the benefits to have a popular lord beside you. It's not clear if you really want Wormtail around you. And opening government says that, well, we should care about the principal obligation to Wormtail, but this is asserted. And this is not a knife. I'm just saying it's a weak argument compared to our arguments, which structurally improve Jorkin's material welfare. Why is Jorkin... So, next I'm going to explain why Berwyn faces immense threat under their side and why that's harmful. Firstly, Wormtongue controls the soldiers and controls pay. So he can do things like get the soldiers to take Berwyn or kill Berwyn. And that means that there's a threat on his life. People will turn against Berwyn most likely. But secondly, the common population hates him. He's an atheist. He is against the thing that they find so core to their identity. But also thirdly, the nobles will probably turn against Berwyn as well, because they believe that there's evidence against him, which means that he might be a traitor to the country. And he is a foreigner. Just because he's a noble does not mean you actually care about him as a noble. So the claim from opening opposition, which is that nobles come to Berwyn's defense, is not true. But also, we would suggest that he is just safe in prison. They might say, oh, well, you know, they can get people into the prison and kill him. That's just really unlikely for a number of reasons. Firstly, because the prisons are like usually underneath the keeps, which means underneath like the big castles and keeps, which means it's difficult to get past the moat into the palace and down into the keeps. Secondly, Berwyn is able to know spy networks and know whether or not an assassin is coming from him, so he can preempt that. He can get information about whether or not his food is poisoned. But thirdly, you just are able to control who comes in and who comes out, which means that with your own guards and with your own security networks, which means you can just protect Berwyn from death. I would note, in this debate, the traitor is probably thwarted under either side. It's just you know that your information's been revealed. You can move your troops. You have to re-strategize. This is not the most important thing in the debate. The most important thing in the debate is Jorkin. No one is talking about Jorkin. We think Jorkin's long-term success is a far more important issue in the debate. And we would say Berwyn is likely to, if he was a traitor, not continue his traitorous behavior, because this is the best way to keep him alive. He knows he's been thwarted before. He will just be on your side into the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that speech, and I'd like to welcome opposition member.
Huzzah!
No one's joining.
Huzzah!
It's okay, you can try a third time.
I think I'm gonna save it. He's been doing really good on the huzzah.
Sorry. Well, I don't know. I guess it depends on the flowers around the noblers. Don't think the aggro is like that. Like, I don't know about yours, but mine's not segmented. It's flat, not round.
Knights and nobles. Firstly, what are thy priorities? Secondly, symmetry. How to think like a traitor. Firstly, what are your priorities in this debate? Chop-Off basically says it's rooting out the traitor. They give you a variety of reasons. They say maybe rooting out the traitor is a good way to protect your kingdom. Secondly, they say maybe you have your honor on the line, and maybe there are reasons to care about that. We would say the most important priority you have is to protect your kingdom from the hunted hordes. There are a couple of reasons. Firstly, you buy into a concept of noblesse obligée, the peasants entrusted upon you the duty of protecting them. Secondly, your king, your liege, has entrusted you with the kingdom, a most honourable obligation. Thirdly, the Huns doth be godless, and therefore, the afterlife is on the line, whether or not you can access it. And fourthly, the collapse of your specific realm doth spell doom for the kingdom writ large, for reasons three. Firstly, the food supply of the kingdom as a whole comes from your kingdom, which is agrarian in nature, and therefore likely crucial in supplying the remainder of the kingdom. So shall your kingdom fall, so does your king and all the other nobles. Secondly, internal borders tend to be much more porous and much weaker than external borders. So once the horde is on your doorstep, that does compromise the remainder of the kingdom. And thirdly, because once they are inside the kingdom, they have access to things like trade networks, access to information, battle plans, etc., that makes it much easier to compromise the remainder of the whole. This should exceed the question of honor and or rooting out the traitor, which are only mechanisms of getting to protection of the kingdom. We point out that maybe rooting out the traitor isn't the best way to protect the kingdom. Secondly, on the symmetry of the debate so far, Jerry basically points this out, which is that both teams in the top half give you many reasons to suspect either character, and many reasons to believe that if either character falls, bad things happen. That is entirely symmetric. You're taking a 50-50 chance. Flipping the coin on either side, and there's really no reason to prefer one to the other. Yeah.
Just because there are two options doesn't mean it's a 50-50 chance, motherfucker. We give you plenty of reasons for it.
They also gave plenty of reasons. Okay, maybe it's probably not exactly 50-50, but I'm not sure either set of reasons was substantially more compelling to thine ears than anything else. So, what we think is useful is to think, what are the incentives of the traitor? What do they want? That will then help you conceptualize how best to respond. The traitor's incentives. Firstly, they've abandoned their king in court, and they've sold it out for money and safety, which is what they value above all else. Therefore, they will want to escape your clutches as soon as possible, and effect an escape with utmost haste, because that brings them free of danger and outside your grasp. That explains why they will not engage in any sabotage, because that, one, increases the risk of discovery, and two, slows down their escape, so their incentive is to get out as fast as possible, and that is also why all of their resources will be dedicated to effecting their escape, and so unless effecting their escape requires sabotaging or harming you in some way, they will not do so. The question to then ask is, upon which arrest do you trigger the most backlash that will prevent you from being able to defend your kingdom? Yes? Listen to the extension. Okay, our claim is arresting Wormtongue is a relatively safe proposition, while arresting arresting the eunuch, the foul eunuch, is a far more dangerous option. Why? Firstly, arresting the Grand Vizier is very feasible. While they are, of course, a great warrior, you have many troops at your disposal and can confine them. On the other hand, the eunuch is aware of the blackest magic of the eunuchs and has assassins and spies everywhere. And as we explain, where you capture them, their incentive to escape aligns with an incentive to kill you, and aligns with an incentive to, for example, sow disarray in your ranks in order to effect the escape. Whereas, where you don't indicate that you're aware of their trail, they have no incentive to sow disarray, because that increases the chance that you discover something is afoot and that you come after them. So, where you allow them to escape, they're very likely to just leave, whereas when you do not attempt to, they will kill you, they will ruin the kingdom, they will sabotage you. That matters for a couple of reasons. Firstly, if you are dead, you cannot fulfill any of your obligations to protect the country, to protect the realm. You are obviously, as the divine right of kings suggests, the most grand knight of your kingdom, the greatest defender possible, the best possible leader, and therefore believe that your utmost obligation is to be able to do so. But secondly, we explain that if you are, the disarray that would sow within your kingdom would make it substantially harder in order for, in your absence, the kingdom to be defended. But thirdly, we point out that it is useful to have Berwin on the loose, to have the fellow roaming around for a couple of reasons. Sorry, yeah, it'd be good to have Berwin around. Yeah, sure.
Surely Berwin is a much safer option to have you find the Huns.
No, for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think as soon as you attempt to enact your plan at closing government, which is tell them, oh, we don't actually think you're the traitor, we're just going to put you in jail, Berwin will kill you, because obviously they know that the game is up, they're probably substantially smarter than you, and they don't want to risk being confined in the cage, since their incentive is to get out of the kingdom as fast as possible. This prevents them getting out of the kingdom, it increases the risk they get detected, so that immediately guarantees you die, and that invites all of the harms of your kingdom falling, so that is a terrible idea and you lose there. But secondly, we point out that it's good to let Berwin leave, because then you can feed misinformation to the Huns, which is the second benefit that we're able to claim. Because you know that he has spies everywhere, you can can now feed various forms of misinformation about your troop movements, which allows you to better defend your kingdom. Why can you not do that if Berwin is in prison? Well, one, because the fact that Berwin is in prison suggests that he will, attempt to effect an escape and his resources will be focused on that. Secondly, because you're likely to be dead. But thirdly, because his guard is up for the reason that he knows that you're onto him, so he's going to be very skeptical of information that, for example, like the secret enemy plans that the spies discover now are going to go through far more scrutiny than where Berwin believes that he has pulled the wool over thine eyes and therefore may affect his most dastardly stratagem. The end of this debate, you need to think about what the incentives of the traitor are, and they best align with your incentives when you allow the most dangerous fellow to believe he's got it over you. If you are wrong, you are safer on our side. If you're right, we win anyway.
Thank you so much for that speech, and I'd like to welcome Percy Donovan.
What a liberation it is to not think about cards being played on me.
Oh, I said it. I just made the same observation earlier. Are you already deprived of whimsy in this debate? Fair Lord, deprived of whimsy.
What up?
Whenever you're ready.
Honoured ladies and gentlemen of the court, on the possibility that we act in haste and arrest the wrong man, the contribution forward to you by His Majesty's humble closing government. It is with great regret that our soothsayers have not allowed us the insight into which man before us is guilty. We have heard a panoply of arguments from the councillors opposite for and against the inscrutable Berwin and Wormtongue the Whisperer. I would forgive you if you had pause, a compliment to the persuasive tongues of those in the opening half. What we allow you to know in this debate with certainty is that Berwin, should we be wrong and arrest the wrong man, is a man surely in need of protection. Lord Jorkin is a man of power, keenly aware that he needs the support of high nobles to resist the oncoming honey hordes who are on the way. Protecting him from the outrage of commoners who surely will fill the streets demanding his head is the most important contribution to this debate. We have presented an argument that functions, to borrow a phrase most contemporary from a foreign time and place, in the best case of opening opposition, and the opposition bench more broadly. If the shrill concubine who spoke to the court moments ago is to be believed, then you surely must side with us. It is incontrovertible that the inscrutable Berwin is a man detested by the common folk. He is a man without heirs, a sexless homosexual, an atheistic Hun, despised for his persnickety grin and noble lineage. When the...
On point.
Sure, go.
Doth not find thyself starved for novelty upon hearing the case of closing opposition, given we describe the traitorousness and danger of Lord Berwin?
Surely you must be correct, you may have to knock them out.
Bizarre.
When the knowledge of the prophecies of our soothsayers reaches the common folk, they will be outraged at the betrayal, and they will surely point their finger at the sexless homosexual, at the atheistic Hun. They will demand that his blood fills the streets. If we instead arrest the people's hero, the great Wormtongue, a man who enjoys the company of womenfolk, as the common man does, this will be anathema to them a second time over. I implore you, dear panel of esteemed, wizened adjudicators, to imagine the world in which opening opposition is right, that Berwin is an innocent and faithful man. They leave Berwin to face this revolt, to face risks to his life and limb.
Question.
This is surely a world in which the nobles will revolt against us, the venerable Jorkin, and we will be overcome by the Huns, and we will perhaps end out at this debate dead. We explain that what you do in this debate, and this is critical, right? You tell one thing to the commoner, that that Bowen's the guilty man, and another to the class of cloaked nobles who control the means of our future survival. We tell them that we're protecting Bowen, that we are simply doing our due diligence, but that we intend to protect him from ultimately those common folk who demand his blood. And you keep them on side in the world in which he is an innocent man. To the commoner, what you have done is satiated their bloodlust for the traitorous Bowen, but to the high noble, you have done what is ultimately a keen-eyed strategy. This is why what we have not done in this debate is traitorous and unsheathed a knife and dishonorably deployed it against the honorable opening government team. We explain that you, the immensely wizened Lord Jorkin, would surely be likely to do an arrest in the fashion that we describe. We are not merely extending new fiat, but rather in this debate, what we are doing is much wiser than the traitorous opening government has accused us of. We are explaining that Jorkin will do this in a keen-eyed and Janus-faced fashion. Of course, you would maybe have the concern of closing opposition, who say that he will not accept the terms of your arrest. You are Lord Jorkin. He will accept the fact that you are trying to protect his life from the honourable common folk who are trying to kill him. Further than this, we explain that Bowen, should you be wrong, is a far less replaceable commodity than is Wormtongue, a commoner, a drunkard, with few connections to the halls of power upon which you might wish to stake the rest of your life. In a setting of uncertainty, and again, I will not blame you for the uncertainty of all the words you've heard this fine afternoon. You should prioritize those future interests in the world where you follow your heart and you ultimately select Ron. Bowen is ultimately more valuable to you to protect. And maybe he is a traitor, but you can wait until the evidence is incontrovertible when you keep the nobles on side as we do in our world, and you have some plausible deniability. But ultimately, a man with connection to the halls of power that you will need to deploy against the Huns, take the and that is the kind of person that you absolutely should protect above all. And that is the certainty that we provide and no other team does. We take on, as a result, a burden most elevated in comparison to our opening, who make much more pedestrian and philistinic arguments. Closing opposition, we agree with the symmetry they demonstrate quite beautifully. I think it is already apparent to the honourable panel where this team has fallen foul. They suggest that it is less risky to arrest Wormtongue. But our suggestion in this debate is that the common folk who till your fields, who pay your taxes, who wield enormous power of weapons that they can revolt against you, threaten the life of Bowen immediately and pose a threat to your survival against the Huns if they revolt and you are ultimately wrong. Bowen is a man that can protect you if you are wrong, that has a lot of power that you can deploy. And that is why you must consider the world in which you follow your heart and guess wrong, and vote to arrest Bowen in circumstances that only the team in closing government have described.
Thank you so much for that speech. To conclude the debate, I'd like to welcome on Official Webb.
Must not forget your noble chalice.
My liege, I come to you with dark tidings. These advisors claim to be nobles, yet methinks they are jesters. Teams that don't understand the scope of their question. This bench calls themselves government, and that reveals their disgusting democratic degeneracies and why this motion shall not pass. I will first explain what Uday tells you, because I know it doesn't have a whole lot of rep, people probably don't listen to him. Let's explain what he actually provides. I think the problem we identify is a very simple one. It is OG lose in the 50% of cases where it's Wormtongue, OO lose in the 50% of cases where it's Bowen, and CG lose in 100% of the cases. Our analysis is very simple. Our analysis is very simple. It is a hedge. Our analysis explains that if Wormtongue is the traitor, we succeed by solving the problem. If Wormtongue is not the traitor, it is still better to arrest Berwin anyway, because he sows less disarray by doing so. So in either circumstance, regardless of whether or not Berwin or Wormtongue is the traitor, it is always better to arrest Wormtongue, always better to arrest Wormtongue and let Berwin run free in either case, because keeping him in the kingdom, even if he is arrested, does as much damage on either side. What is our extension? What do we tell you? Firstly, that Berwin sows disarray within the kingdom. Yes, Berwin sows disarray within the kingdom. The reason as to why this is not comparative is the info slide tells us the betrayer will leave the kingdom after they're gone, which implies that if Berwin is in fact evil, he will leave and will not be able to exert bad influence over your spy network. And moreover, there is a reciprocal benefit we identify in today's speech, which is that these spies now work for you, whereas otherwise, if you had kept him in prison, you would be fighting a war on two fronts. And that is the crux of our extension. Both against the Huns invading you, but also against the network of spies trying to free their compatriot. Why is that the case? We provide you with two reasons. Firstly, that Berwin himself has the incentive to escape, but that secondly, he would seek vengeance upon his captors. This implies that it is far better to take away the known and only certain harm that you can get rid of. You know that there will be an invasion on either side. These two teams, I'm serious, this is an enormous problem. These two teams stop one person with a little bit of information. They don't do shit about the invasion, which is almost guaranteed to happen on either side. We prevent you from fighting an additional war as well. What does that disarray mean? Our opening opposition identify one thing, which is, well, maybe Berwin would assassinate you. We take this far, far further to the actual argument that is really important in this debate, which is that stuff like August, the things that this spy network would do, affect more broadly the kingdom and your future going forward. Noting that it is speculative as to whether or not they could kill you. It is speculative on whether or not they want to, and not just free Berwin. We imply that if he's held captive, they would want to make the kingdom worse. We tell you that one, they would do stuff like spreading misinformation and poison, putting your army into disarray, poisoning your generals, your family, taking wealth, burning crops. These are things that make things much, much worse. And we give you a series of reasons as to why you would likely care about the kingdom. That they do give you things like financial power, they give you your job, they could put you in jail otherwise. But secondly, Uday tells you about the divine right of kings. You would want to protect them so that you do well for the future life, and this would advance the kingdom's interest. For all those reasons, we imply that there will be an enormous, enormous benefit. The second and far less important question in this debate, you want to listen to this before you do your POIs. The second and far less important question in this debate is, will stopping the correct betrayer significantly impact the invasion? There are 6 reasons why broadly it does not. Firstly, betrayal in and of itself does not affect things. It's pretty obvious where these troops are. They're not particularly stealthy. We haven't invented stuff like that. Secondly, the knowledge that one of them will betray you actually downplays the importance of the betrayal because you just feed them incorrect information. It is unclear you've given more information to one or the other. 3, the king can always sort of back you up in either circumstance. Only Uday explains to you why the king would want to, because you want to protect your agriculture, you want to protect all of your resources. So the biggest certainty in deterring and affecting the invasion occurs on either side, which is the king's army and the whole rest of the kingdom coming in to defend you, which only closing opposition explain is likely. So, if you're actually thinking of this question, you have to ask yourself, which team gives you the best way and reason to win the war? Is it the opening teams that go after one traitor, or is it closing opposition who tells you the king himself would come in to defend you? The king himself would, I guess, would help you. The second reason why arresting the traitor does not matter is it is already too late. You only have a limited amount of time, but this is especially true of arresting Bowen because he has a spy network. So you really don't get any of your benefits, right? Because presumably his spies know about this stuff, or you could whisper it to them through the wall, and you don't get a huge degree of benefit. Thirdly, it's I guess this is the biggest thing. It's hard to know either way. The fact that both of you have so many reasons explains why this is a choice that is very difficult to make. And then fifthly, Bowen's got assassins. They could just break him out, and he could pass on the information either way. So this is a question that is just not valuable. Opening government.
We would not neglect our honour and duty to the king by arresting a man we suspect to be innocent because we're afraid of what would happen to some peasants. The info slide mentions no debts, and Berwin is most willing able to flee to a foreign state.
The problem that you
Seize him, I
identify.
beg of you.
The problem that you identify is that you do not know he is an innocent man, and we have good reason to suspect that one of them is guilty. We trust our lovely soothsayer, which implies that, and at the very least, we know that a few of these people have done sussy things to you in the past before, right? You know that they have done bad things. It is in the info slide. The last claim that is made is, well, maybe we don't know which one of them can sort of do stuff, but opening government say, at the very least, Wormtongue is valuable in the war because he's beloved. Well, the only thing we know about him is he does the fucking taxes of the country. That would make him pretty hated. No, fuck taxes. Oh shit, it's recorded. The other thing is, they probably do more fiscal taxes than fiscal stimulus in ancient kingdoms, because they don't have that much money, which implied he would not be particularly beloved. Thirdly, as closing government identify, we can probably still use him and get stuff out of him from jail. And thirdly, we probably don't know much about that belovedness because there's no peasants Twitter. It can't be hashtag stop the steal for I don't know, putting a guy in jail. It's probably unclear as to what they know. You can put up some propaganda. So this implies that at the very least, there is not a significant benefit to having this person than you would otherwise get from just having them in jail. The biggest thing is making sure that the king helps you, and that is what we uniquely explain will occur, and occurs better on our world when we are able to not be fighting a war, working with another team. Lastly, let's talk about closing government. They say Berwin would accept his arrest. One, this is exactly the same as with Wormtongue, presumably do it the same way. And we're very happy for their claim around escaping, he can escape an arrest to be in the debate, because it just means he can poison you on both sides, it takes out the makes it easier for us. For all those reasons, proud to have.